We'd like to thank Montecito Bank and Trust for their generous support in making Scam Squad possible.
Welcome to Scam Squad. I'm Patty Teal here with Christina Perkins, Chief Investigator for the DA's Office for the County of Santa Barbara. Christina, I'm so excited about today's show. You brought some special guests with you.
I did, Patty. Thank you again for having us. Today I have two guests. They're part of our Consumer Protection Unit at the District Attorney's Office. They're going to talk about one specific case that I really wanted to highlight. When we talk about Scam Squad, we like to highlight the scams that happen in our community. I really wanted to shine a spotlight on our Consumer Protection Unit and all the excellent work that they do. So today we have Senior Deputy District Attorney Chris Dalby. Welcome, Chris.
Well, hey, thanks, Christine. I'm happy to be here.
And then I have Investigator Robert Parmalee, who is the investigator assigned to the unit. Welcome.
Hi there. Yeah, thanks for having me. And Patty, thank you.
Oh, thank you both for being here.
We are here to talk about a case that I actually had a little bit to do with prior to being promoted, and that is the Sunfire defense case. Tell us a little bit about that, Chris.
So this is a case that got started back in early 2018 after the Thomas fires, which tore through our community, and then we had really the tragedy of the debris flows. There was some TV advertising by a company that went by Sunfire Defense that someone in our office saw, and they were advertising a kind of a spray-on fire retardant, and it was really hitting our community at a time that people were vulnerable. The fires had just happened, and people wanted their houses to be safe for the next fire. And as we all know, there will be a next fire, so people wanted their houses to be safe. And this person in our office talked to me and some others in our consumer protection unit and said, "Hey, is this a real product? Is this a scam, or is this thing for real?" And we didn't know. We're not fire protection experts, but we started looking at it. We contacted the company to start talking to them. We hired some fire protection experts to take a look at the product, and we realized that some of the key aspects of their advertising were false or misleading. They said that the product could withstand temperatures up to 3,000 degrees. They said it would last for up to 5 years. And that little "up to" phrase, it really sticks them with the high number. You can't say up to 5 years, but it only lasts 1 year. So you see that in a lot of advertising. So the up to 5 years, and they said it was Class A rated. So that was the kind of the fire protection claims that they made. And they also said it was non-toxic, which now is a big deal for folks. You want to buy something, if you're going to spray it on your house and it's going to stay there, if you've got kids or pets, you want to know that if you choose to get something that's non-toxic, it really should be non-toxic. And we realized there was enough evidence for us to move forward and file a civil lawsuit. And like Christina said, this is a civil case, not a criminal case.
So just so the listeners know, what makes it a civil case rather than a criminal case?
The key distinction between a civil case and a criminal case is that in civil cases, the penalty is a monetary penalty. There's no jail time. Jail time is not something that exists in a civil case. And it means that in addition to monetary penalty, we're seeking injunctive relief, which is just a legal term that means we want the court to order them to stop doing something or to actually go do something. In this case, we wanted the court to order them to stop their false advertising.
Makes a lot of sense, because I remember the Thomas fire and just how frightened, right, the community was. And when you think about a company that's promising to keep people safe in their homes from fire, stopping that company from false advertising, that's really protecting the community.
Yeah, that's right. In our unit, we really do have a focus on public safety, like the rest of the DA's office. We can't possibly investigate and prosecute every instance of false advertising that's out there. So we really have to prioritize issues of public safety, issues that really affect a whole bunch of people. In this instance, there were about, real rough numbers, about a half dozen victims in Santa Barbara County and about 100 victims throughout Southern California. And I should mention that, as the investigation got going, we did team up with the LA City Attorney's Office, and they had additional resources to help investigate the case. and we jointly represented the people of the state of California in the case.
When you talk about victims, like how much was this company charging to so-called protect their homes from the fire?
Several thousand up to $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. I mean, typically from what we saw, they charged by the square foot of surface, of exterior surface that was treated. So it was a lot of money.
When you say surface, like what were they saying would happen? So are they spraying a substance on the house, or walk us through exactly what they were promising?
So they were promising that the home, and they specifically mentioned several types of substances, but they didn't always specify the substances. And that's important in advertising, because when they said it would protect, wood and other porous materials, okay, but they didn't limit it that way. They would have photos on their website of just an ordinary stucco house. So really, effectively, what they were promising is that your house, the surfaces, it's hard to avoid being technical, but that the outside surfaces of your house would not ignite up to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, when exposed to that heat. Any surface that's treated. So that the 3,000 degrees, and that protection would last 5 years, and that it was Class A rated, which kind of sounds like a kind of bizarre marketing thing, but it actually is a real term in the fire protection industry. But our testing, and we did hire a fire protection lab, and our testing determined that if it was Class A rated, it was Class A rated only on structural lumber, but not necessarily on any other surface to which it was applied.
So walk us through how that testing happened. So you have the company promising that this substance is sprayed on their home. It's going to protect their home from fires. What sort of testing did you do to show that that wasn't true or correct?
Yeah, so I can certainly discuss testing that has become part of the public record in the court files. And, initially they provided us some records of their own testing. So we wanted to do our own confirmation to see if their testing was accurate. And then we did some additional testing. So I'm going to go through what happened. One thing that we did is we hired a lab in Washington State, which is a lab that's approved by CAL FIRE, to run particular wildfire exposure tests. And what they did is they built mock walls, 4 feet wide by 8 feet tall. They built one that had cedar siding, untreated cedar, one that had stucco siding, and one that had painted plywood siding. And for each of those, they had a control, meaning they had one that was untreated with the Sunfire Defense product. And the product actually was called SPF 3000. So then they had a controlled burn of these walls to see if untreated versus treated, what's the benefit of having the treatment? And for each of these surfaces, there was no real meaningful benefit. I'm not going to say zero benefit, but there was no kind of meaningful benefit. And that told us that it's not going to last 5 years, because if it doesn't last, a few days in between treatment and burn, it can't possibly last 5 years. It also told us that it's not going to last up to 3,000 degrees, because that flame was, and I'd have to have the lab report, but plus or minus 1,000 degrees. We did some additional testing for the toxicity part of it. We hired a toxicologist to look at the product data and determine whether, in her expert opinion, the material, which is a liquid, the spray-on material is indeed toxic. And that's a specific term in the law that has meaning. And her conclusion was that it is indeed toxic in its liquid and in its cured form, meaning once it's dried onto your house.
That was really good information on the technical testing. Did you do any testing of people's homes that were sprayed?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. We went out to 2 people's homes and literally chiseled off samples from the side of their house. A woman named Mary Lou and a woman named Mary Ann, of all coincidences, went out to their 2 houses. And I think actually Christina was there for one of them to help establish chain of custody.
Yeah.
chipped it off with a chisel, and then sent those pieces of wood siding. One was a cedar siding, and the other was, I think it was like painted wood panels, to a lab. And really the question was, is there any product remaining? Because these were treated within the last couple of years, or the few years prior to the analysis. So if the product is still there, okay, maybe it lasts 5 years. If the product isn't there, then it can't possibly last 5 years. And in both instances, there was no real conclusive evidence that the product was still there. You know, we don't know what happened to it. We don't know what was applied, when it came off, how it came off. That's not something we can figure out. We thought that was strong evidence that it doesn't last 5 years.
No, and that's really impactful. If we just want to paint the picture too, this home, I'll let you describe it. I was there, and it's just this beautiful wood home in a very dangerous, likely high fire area in Santa Barbara. And they thought they were protected, right? They genuinely spent time and money researching, or what they thought they did, researching things to protect themselves from fire. And what they really did was get scammed by a company that offered security and then sold them a product that didn't work. I went out there with you, you're right. And I remember reading the results after getting it and just being really disappointed to see that there was nothing, right? That this home that the inhabitants thought they were protected, they weren't protected because of this product at all.
Yeah, and I think it could be a good moment to highlight what we alleged and what we actually had to prove. You know, we alleged it didn't last for 5 years as advertised. It didn't last up to 3,000 degrees as advertised, and it was not Class A rated as advertised. So we didn't actually have to prove it doesn't work at all. And that really wasn't even our goal, to prove it has no utility or no function at all. But we believe the evidence established that it doesn't last up to 5 years, does not protect up to 3,000 degrees, and is Class A rated only in a very particular circumstance when it's applied to structural lumber. And you know, we believe we had the evidence to prove the allegations.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I just really want to say that typically as our unit, the consumer protection unit, we investigate things like businesses, like real businesses that are doing unfair practices, or they're promoting things in an untrue, misleading, or deceptive manner. And typically we end up doing that on a statewide level. We'll work with other with the Attorney General's office. We'll work with other district attorneys' offices that have similar roles as myself that work in investigations. And typically we do these cases with a large amount of customers across the state that are being impacted. This one was significant because really it was local. It's one of the few local cases that we've handled that were pretty strict to Santa Barbara, LA County. And I know that in the scam squad, you guys will often talk about the different tactics that companies will use in order to get people to give over money or make a purchase or do things. This one really followed the Thomas fire and used people's sense of fear, the fire, and then the upcoming, potential for the tragedy, which was the Montecito mudslides. This one really impacted our community on that local level, and we felt that we really needed to protect our local Santa Barbara and LA County residents. So on this particular case, this is one of those instances where the average person doesn't have the availability to use science and toxicologists and other folks to test the product. And in a time where you think that your house may be catching on fire here, the kind of time is of the essence. So I felt like this company took advantage of these people's fear of losing their home and all their worldly items.
Yeah, and it's so great that you took it on to help these people, because obviously this is an expensive process to do this. Did some of these people come to you, or how did it get on your radar in the first place that this was happening? And then do you represent each of those families? Is it like a the class litigation like you see on television with
No, it's
Yakovich or those kind of things?
so I'll explain sort of the way our office does these consumer protection cases. I think it's good for the community to know our role. So someone in our office saw a TV commercial and asked us, internally, hey, is this a real product? Can you look at that? They were concerned if people were buying it. And our view is if someone has a new product that works, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Makes a new mousetrap. We're not trying to interfere with people's ability to have new businesses and go make money. We represent, the only client we have or plaintiff in our cases is the people of the state of California. So in effect, it's like we represent everyone at the same time, but we don't actually represent individual consumers or families. So, no one has to contact us to hire us to be their lawyer.
Right.
And we're not actually any individual person's lawyer. The plus side is that we just bring the cases we think are, fair and just and need attention. We of course can't do every case that's possible. We can seek restitution for people, for victims. It's one of the things we can do to try and bring justice to people. We don't always obtain it, depends on the individual case. Our ultimate goal, though, although we can get monetary penalties, because that's the punishment in a civil case, and we can get restitution, our true goal is to get someone to stop breaking the law.
Right.
That's always the goal. We don't need to get money to keep the lights on. The money is valuable as a punishment, but the goal is to make people comply with the law or get them to stop breaking it.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that.
Yeah.
So why is that monetary portion so important? Why is the threat of the monetary fines an important part of the process?
Well, the folks we're dealing with are companies who are engaging, or individual people, but I'll say companies, they're engaging in their business to make money, right? That's why they're out there. So the threat of a monetary penalty or an actual monetary penalty serves as a deterrent. It's often more profitable to break the law. That's one of the premise of it's called the unfair competition law. It's the key law we use in our cases is that any unlawful act by a company is inherently an act of unfair competition because it's frankly cheaper to not comply with the law. You have to spend time and resources. If you want to make sure your product does what it says, you have to go pay for testing, right? That's going to cost you money. And that comes up in all manner of consumer and even environmental protection cases. And even more broadly, one reason personally I'm interested in these cases is that consumer transactions are how we obtain the necessities of life, right? Food, you're at the grocery store, whether it's Vaughn's or Trader Joe's, wherever it is, that's a consumer transaction. If you're renting a car, leasing a car, buying a car, those are all consumer transactions. To get housing, if you buy a house, that all the stuff with the bank and the mortgage entity, those are consumer transactions. If you're renting, your interaction with your landlord's a consumer transaction. So it's very much how we get what we need to survive. So those interactions, that's what consumer law is, and consumer protection. The goal is to kind of police those transactions so that people aren't cheated, they're not deceived, they're treated fairly. And we live in a capitalist society, and that we've agreed as a society that it's okay, and maybe even better, for the entities that give us what we need to make a profit on. So on the flip side, if you don't do what you're supposed to do and you break the law and cheat, a monetary penalty seems appropriate.
That's a very good way of explaining it. Thank you. So Robert, tell us a little bit about investigation in your role. So the Consumer Protection Unit is so important, and I know what you do, but explain to our listeners, what does the Bureau do? What does the investigator of the Consumer Protection Unit do?
Sure. So the Consumer Protection Unit is a unit of one when it comes to investigating in our office. So often we do have to look at cases and try to decide what's the impact, what's the total number of people that are being defrauded out of money on their purchases. Or what is the impact? What is the danger or potential impact on public safety? So those are some of the decisions, I guess, factors in what we make in deciding what to investigate. But really, my role is to intake complaints, or what we just call them consumer complaints. For any customer, they could be in our county, they could be anywhere within the state. And basically, we hear them out. And any time that a business is being untrue, misleading, or falsely advertising the product that they're trying to sell or service to a customer, that's when I start looking into them. And there's a little bit of a review process, which honestly, I won't bore you guys with.
Mhm.
But quite frankly, what we do is we talk to the customers. And that doesn't mean you necessarily have to buy the product in order to be defrauded. They could also just advertise it to you. And if you feel like there's a level of deception, we could still investigate it and potentially prosecute it. So part of the violation is just the advertising in and of itself. You don't have to lose money to still call us and make a complaint. And I will say that, with the people that I talk to, as far as socioeconomic status, where they live, just general demographics, age, it doesn't matter. And really, anyone could be impacted. A lot of these, we'll call them scams, are real businesses selling real products and services that they're just not being accurate or truthful about to the customers. So people really shouldn't feel bad about purchasing the product or feeling like they got tricked into getting it, because that's the whole point of the business practice, is that they effectively were lying when they made that representation. And sometimes, in this case, when we were talking about Sunfire Defense, the average customer doesn't have the ability to do this testing on the product, especially in a time of need.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll also highlight that a lot of times doing just due diligence of using Google or talking to friends, family, neighbors, and just hearing the public out on what their thought is on products does go a long way for you when it comes to deciding whether to actually purchase a product.
Now, you bring up two really good points that we talk about on the show a lot, right? Is that emotion when people are afraid. And that's what, with scams, they'll prey on emotion. They'll make you afraid that you have a warrant, or, afraid that your grandchild's in trouble, and they make you make a decision based out of fear. And that sounds like what the Sunfire Defense Company was doing, right? These people are afraid of fires, and they may not make a decision or look into the company like they usually would if they're going to spend $10,000, $20,000, because they're making that decision out of fear. And then the second point too is the embarrassment. A lot of times something will happen and you'll get scammed, or there's some sort of consumer product and you're embarrassed that you fell for it and they won't report it. So how should someone report if they think that they've been the victim of consumer fraud?
Yeah, and before I say that, before I answer your question, I have to add, the other thing that they do is they will also prey on people's sense of urgency.
Yes.
We've all seen the commercials, act now before, while supplies last. And really, Sunfire Defense, what they did in this case is they acted on all of those points that you just mentioned. They felt the sense of urgency. When's the next fire going to happen? How long am I going to be safe? The fear aspect of it. So really all those points were hit. So when something like this happens, what I will do is I will say, if to the listeners here on this podcast, if you're listening to this and you're thinking of something that happened to you in the past, or if any of these boxes have been checked and you feel like, again, something's been untrue, misleading, or just false, and it's been advertised to you, I'll give you my desk line. It's 805-568-2368. Again, 805-568-2368. And I'd be happy to hear about it.
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
and then just so we know, so we've explained what the case was, what was the disposition? What happened?
So in the Sunfire Defense case, this last June, the end of June, the court issued what's called a default judgment. The defense, and there was the company and the individual owner of the company, were the defendants, went through, I'd have to look at my notes. It's either 4 or 5 defense attorneys So that the case dragged on for a while. The COVID pandemic slowed down the case. Ultimately, the defendants stopped participating in the lawsuit, which is why it was put into default. I'm not going to bore you all with what that means legally, but we got a default judgment against the defendants for $2.5 million in penalties and approximately $2.2 million in restitution.
Oh, wow.
And so and an injunction. I mean, frankly, the money is always what people want to hear, but the injunction is basically a laundry list of the false or misleading advertising statements they made. And it's the judge in writing saying, don't say the following things. As it lists out, and I'll just give an example for one of them, advertising that SPF 3000 is effective for 5+ years after a single application or for any amount of time. So it's really detailed like that. It just lists what the company and the owner are not allowed to say about this particular product.
Now, what I find interesting, just from our conversations we've had over the years about this case, is that even during the case and when it was open, there were still people buying the product. So how can people protect themselves from scams like this?
It's difficult. I think anytime you feel like you just have to do something, or when you have the spidey sense telling you it's too good to be true, if your emotions you're kind of wound up, sleep on it for a day or two, talk to a friend about it, just to get a kind of a reality check. I mean, we've all been excited about something that we think is going to help us.
Sure.
And Robert,
and to add to that, that was one of the troubling things about Sunfire Defense in this case that we worked. While the case was being actively litigated, as in the public record, there was a case filed against the company. We still had customers purchasing the product. And we can't really stop that. I mean, they still have the ability to, but we can't prevent customers, we can't hold them down and stop them from buying it until the case is settled, or unless there's basically an order put into place to tell the company to stop selling the product or doing what they're doing. They could still technically do it.
Yeah, and as a legal matter, until the case is resolved, legally what's happened is that we, the people, have alleged the company is breaking the law, but the court hasn't agreed with it yet. Mm-hmm. So it's an allegation, which, our view is the evidence was sufficient and we did get a default judgment. But until that judgment is entered, someone might look at it and just say, oh, maybe the government has it wrong, or why is the government messing with this business? People have different ideas about what it means when the government sues someone.
No, that's a really good point, right? That innocent until proven guilty. But the point I was hoping we could talk about too was just during that case, if they would have done a simple internet search, right, a Google search, would they have seen that there was a civil case against the company?
It's likely. Our office, along with the LA City Attorney's Office, issued a press release when we filed the case. And, we're careful to explain all we've done is file a case. At one point, several years into litigation, I think Bloomberg ran an article about the company, which did mention the lawsuit. And I think that would have been close to the top of the Google search results. So at least someone would have been on notice that the company's facing a legal challenge. What the customer would have done with that information, that's up to them.
All right. Well, that's all really great information. And I'm just really happy to highlight the unit today because you do so much for Santa Barbara County.
You too, Christina. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. All the time I've been doing Scam Squad, I didn't seem to know about this very important division. And thank you so much, both of you, Chris and Robert, for being here. This was fascinating.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Thank you so much.
One thing I did, I think, want to say is, and this is to really give people a sense of the world of scams, and then the kind of consumer protection world, that a lot of the scams that you all have talked about are, things through email scams and phishing and the QR codes and things that once your money's gone, it might be impossible to figure out where it went. We in Santa Barbara County, we don't have the resources to, track these wire transfers around the world. That's something for the feds,
Mhm.
maybe the state attorney general. You know, we're dealing with really tangible issues people come across. Like when they bought food, was the scale accurate at the grocery store? When they rented a car, was there some kind of like hidden fee in there? You know, is the TV advertising, you know, accurate, not misleading? So, you know, when someone's out there kind of in the world going about their business, it's not just these like criminal scams to be wary of. And I'm not telling people to be wary of everything. Don't be a cynic out there. But just
I do. I tell people to be wary of it.
no, I say be wary, but don't be a cynic. You know, don't not engage with the world, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yes,
But
yes.
if you think a legitimate business deceived you, let us know. You know,
Yeah.
it's not just the criminal scammers who are, you know, breaking the law.
And that's so Robert gave us his personal desk line, which we appreciate. And that's for Santa Barbara County. So if people think the listeners that are outside of our county, or some even listen out of state, who would you suggest they contact if they have some sort of consumer question?
I mean, most state attorney general offices have a consumer protection unit, whatever it's called. And then there's always the Federal Trade Commission. The FTC has nationwide authority, and there's a kind of behind the scenes network of consumer prosecutors that will route complaints. So if you complain to the FTC, but you're in Utah, it'll probably end up at the Utah Attorney General's office. I'm not saying that for sure, but try not to get too wrapped up in who to complain to, and just get it to someone who has a complaint portal.
Perfect. That's excellent information. Well, again, thank you so much for being guests, and I hope to have you on again to talk more about your consumer protection unit.
Great. Thanks, Patty.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Thank
Christina.
you both so
Yeah.
very much. Great. Thank you. And Christina, I look forward to talking to you next week.
Yes, and let me just give the listeners the hotline in case anyone has a general scam issue or question. It's 805-568-2442.
Thank you so much, Christina. Bye,
All right.
everybody.
Bye.